You're welcome to the Policy Council. My name is Okpeyemi Agbaje. This week we look at poverty and unemployment in Nigeria. The NBS, the National Bureau of Statistics, has given us some data which should cause alarm to anyone who cares about social cohesion in this country. Unemployment is 23.9%. Of 15 to 24-year-olds, it is 37.7%. Whatever measure of poverty you take, over 100 million Nigerians are poor. What can we do about this? What are the causes of this? What should we do to improve the prospects, to tie economic growth to the alleviation of poverty and the creation of employment in this country? That's what we will look at today. Enjoy the program. I have on the council with me Ms. Ehith Eyenye. He's the CEO of Fares Consulting. And Johnson Chukwu is the Managing Director of Calvi Asset Management. You're welcome, gentlemen.
A pleasure.
I'm sure, Ehith, let me start with you. You've seen this poverty data, the unemployment figures. What hit you the first minute you saw those data?
Well, the first thing I felt was that finally the National Bureau of Statistics has formally and officially confirmed what we've suspected for a long time. Between 1980, the poverty incidence level was said to be 27%, using the
measures, the absolute, relative, dollar per day.
The relative measure. It was 27% in 1980, and as at 2010, it had become 69%, nearly 70%. You wonder, and then even if you look at what has happened post, becoming the democratic country, where you think, okay, well, the military act now, we have a more people focused because we're the democracy. You see that the figures also do not reflect the fact that our democracy is people-oriented. Another thing I found curious was looking at comparing the regional statistics. I found it very curious to see that a state like Delta State, even the South, which has had a lot of revenue on account of the oil and gas income, surprisingly, the incidence of poverty is almost as bad as other parts of the country. So this is alarming, and personally, for me, it just boils down to what I believe that the real problem is corruption. I'm one of those that think that it's not because we have underspent on projects or we underspent, whether you given the current or capital aspect of our expenditure. The real truth is that it's just corruption, because you don't see the life of Nigerians being impacted by government expenditure.
It's possible, and I agree that there's a significant element explained by corruption. But I also think that there are structural factors. There are policy choices. For every naira that the government decides to spend, they make a choice about who's going to enjoy this one naira. So if they make a choice to build flyovers and bridges in Abuja and to construct roads and construct towers and all of that, office blocks for every federal government parastatal, it means that those nairas are not going to poverty alleviation, to building a school in that village in Delta State that you spoke about. What do you think, Johnson?
Well, I think that's the crux of the matter. The policy decisions, the direction of development. You see, the truth is that if you look at that report, it also shows that the number of Nigerians that are rich have also increased drastically, significantly. But what has happened at the majority of Nigerians...
So inequality
is widening. Income disparity is widening. So basically what has happened is that the government has not focused on addressing those basic infrastructural needs that will make the income level of those who do not have certain privileges, who do not have access to economic rent, to actually live standard life. Like what has happened in China, where China has moved more than 500 million of their population out of poverty, 600 million of their population out of poverty. What we have seen is a situation where the government has not focused on the right policies beyond the corruption, which I agree with you, is that the corruption has been there, is an issue. But the key thing is that beyond corruption, misgovernance, bad policy directions, inability of the government to implement policies that are directed at alleviating poverty. We have seen a situation whereby the government has come up with lip service to poverty alleviation. The issue is that what policies have we done to improve the level of agriculture from subsistence level to a level of economic, to turn them to being like what we're doing now in the current, under the current Minister of Agriculture. What have we done to activate the industrial sector, the real sector, so that we can create more employment? If you look at the poverty index, like you did mention, if you look at the 70s and 80s, we had a relatively industrial base. The industrial sector or the manufacturing sector accounted for more of our GDP. But look at what we have now. Agriculture is 42, but agriculture is basically subsistence. Those who are engaged in agriculture are still living very poor because they just live hand to mouth. You have the oil and gas sector that accounts about 16%. By the time you factor in the trade, commercial trade, retail trade, hotel and retail, telecom, you have the whole of the economy. You have about 80% of the economy accounted for sectors that are not impacting directly on poverty.
This thing is more shocking, like you said, because poverty has increased over a period of very high oil prices, very high revenues, very decent external reserves. There's an incongruity there. People get better off when their incomes are wider. So it's like the country is getting richer, but the people are getting poorer.
You know, if you look at the pattern of government expenditure, you can understand why that is happening. Apparently, you know, government expenditure actually enriches foreigners. Here we are, you know, the projects that, you know, even the capital projects, the projects and the things that government is spending money on, the tendency is that those things, we are creating jobs overseas. We are helping the other nations to lift their people out of poverty. I cannot but come down to the issue of corruption. Because the tendency is that the project that, if you are doing projects that will help the people, the opportunity for corruption is limited. So unfortunately, our
you have to think of a grand project.
All kinds of, you know, big elephant projects, white elephant projects.
With those big elephants. Yeah. Let's take a break. We'll be back.
Who knows Abi better thing? Abi who know like better thing? All these fine things where they see so. Now money government they take do now. Abi, I think it's like, you know, I mean, excuse me, I dey pay my tax. I dey do a thing, I dey pay my tax. Say you don't pay your own tax. If you pay your tax, I pay. Oh.
Pay your tax. It's your civic responsibility. It's your duty. It's the law.
We're still on the Policy Council. I still have Eis and Johnson Chukwu with me, and we're looking at poverty and unemployment. But let's focus on unemployment. The unemployment figure, according to the NBS, is 23.9%. The one that scares me is the unemployment figure for 15 to 24-year-olds. It's 37.7%. If you take regional disparities, there are regions in which it's significantly higher. Maybe in some regions it's slightly lower. Again, doesn't that greatly elevate the potential for crisis and instability?
The Arab crisis was sparked by youth unemployment. And we have that, so there's a potential danger that the level of crime and criminalities in the country will worsen as the number of people who are in that age bracket between 15 and 24 as they continue to increase without source of livelihood. Basically, if you look at, you have a rural urban migration, young people moving from the rural areas to the urban areas. They get to the urban area, there are no employment. The factories are closed down. And then we are trying to run an economy that's service-oriented, an economy with a population of 160 million. There is no way you can sustain employment in an economy of 160 million if that economy is service-oriented. So we have to go back and address those infrastructural deficiencies that have made manufacturing unprofitable and unviable in the country.
Manufacturing, agriculture.
We need to address the agricultural value chain such that so that people will have an incentive to work in agricultural setups.
But there's an incongruity again we'll get from those involved in recruiting people. So companies tell you that okay, we need people. We say there's such a high level of unemployment, but companies say we can't find good people. We can't find skilled people. We have difficulty recruiting even fresh graduates. We have to interview 1,000 before we find 10 good people. What's the cause of that, Ehis? What do you think we can do about those scenarios?
Unfortunately, over the years, our value system was such that we have debased education, and we've devalued our teachers, our lecturers. So it's not unexpected that the quality of the products from that system will be what we are seeing. But see, on this issue of employment, you see, in many countries, the employers are not really the big corporations.
Yeah.
The employers are not, it's the small and medium enterprises, this cottage industry.
Yes.
You see, that's why on the policy angle, what we expect is for the government to focus on policies that will actually encourage the small businessman to go into business.
How about vocational skills? How about artisans? How about plumbers? Everybody goes to higher institutions, gets a degree, but doesn't get a job. Meanwhile, we import plumbers,
artisans and plumbers and
nuclears. What do you think a focus on giving people skills will help in this?
You see, those are some of the areas where we've gotten it wrong as a nation. We used to have technical colleges that we are churning out artisans. We used to, the polytechnics were designed, ab initio, for technical colleges. Finally, on a final note, there is no way the real sector, including the small-scale enterprises, will actually thrive where the cost structure we have now, because of infrastructure deficiencies, persist.
So, my name is Laide Awoyemi. I live for Lagos. You see, as our new Lagos just define the good. Good thing, good though. To go market now, no hard at all. Just pay. Sit down inside BRT bus. Small time, you don't reach where they go. Hospital call, the full ground. And for me and my pikin where I just born, treatment now free. You look left, you look right. Them they build new roads, new hospitals, new schools, new things everywhere. Everywhere they shine, gone. We thank God though. But come on, I hear saying that this tax money where they pay, now then they use to do all these good things. Yeah, they pay my own tax. Say they pay your own.
Pay your tax. It's your civic responsibility. It's your duty. It's the law.
On this segment, I have a foremost economist, Dr. Ayo Teriba, who is CEO of Economic Associates. Together, we'll be discussing poverty, unemployment, and we'll be trying to understand the figures and the phenomenon of poverty and unemployment in Nigeria. Dr. Ayo Teriba, you're welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for paying.
Okay, I'm sure you've seen these figures. Poverty in Nigeria, whichever definition of it you adopt, comes to somewhere around 60%, 61%, which means over 100 million Nigerians are poor. What do you think has caused poverty, such high levels of poverty in this country?
Well, the first one is historical. We should all remember that the Nigerian economy and much of African economy had 2 decades, the 80s and the 90s, of stagnation, in which growth was very hard to get, and you had all sorts of macroeconomic instability, exchange rate devaluation, inflation, high interest rates, and the rest of it, which led to the rise of poverty. By the end of the 70s, you could say that Nigerians were better off than they found themselves by the end of the 90s. Now, but since 1999, we've seen recovery in the domestic economy, lifted by the recovery of the global economy itself. The wealth, so this is the second driver of poverty. Figures like these are helpful in conveying, if you like, a sense of urgency, to the policymakers on how to use the proceeds of this round of recovery
High oil
of
prices.
recovery. You know, high commodity prices, not
Commodity
just
prices,
oil,
yeah.
is crop prices, you know, whether they are food or raw materials. And the government was at the time helpless. Even government was busy retrenching. It was difficult for them to run their budgets. But in the last 12, 13 years, opportunities, we have the opportunities again. And government policies do not yet reflect the urgency. You know, in other parts of the world, you wouldn't have a government, you know, doing oil price benchmark that involves savings amounting to trillions of naira each year, and not, you know, putting strong proposals on the table on how that will be used to make a difference, you know, in the daily lives of the population.
There are Nigerians who believe that all of the poverty is caused by corruption. And no matter what policy you articulate, if there's corruption, Nigerians will remain poor. What do you think about that point of view?
As long as our policies are in blanket terms, you know, they are not done, there is no reference to the end beneficiaries. You know, budget figures are, you know, given to the ministries. We are talking lump sum. It's not clear who is going to get what, you know, and so it's difficult to track, you know, when this has happened. You need to address government budgets too, you know, because it's easy for leakages to happen, you know, and
So
what
those-
the delay,
so
what the
those who say
deliverables
that-
are for them.
That policies are not ideologically neutral. You have to define what is driving the policy, what you're trying to achieve. Is it targeted at the poor? Is the policy targeted at the rich? Is it targeted at affecting the middle class? You are in support of such a point of view?
Well, I'm in support of, you see, you can talk policies, you can talk projects, you can talk programs, but you can also talk people. Now, that you're talking of poverty, you're talking, it's a people issue. Are we talking girls? Are we talking women? Are we talking children? Are we talking retirees? Until you unmask who are these poor, it's going to be difficult. Everybody will talk about it. Nobody will do anything about it. Similarly, for unemployment, you have to talk people. You have to tell us who are they, where are they? So you can go back and check. There was a time the menace of area boys in Lagos, you know, but they knew where the problems were. They knew who the people were. So they were able to go after it, you know.
And indeed, the figures show that Lagos has the lowest unemployment of 7% in the country.
Yeah, because Lagos presents opportunities that makes it easy for people to escape from poverty.
Let's take a break, and we'll be right back. You're welcome back. Dr. Soriba, how come we have managed to grow poverty over a period of relatively, historically high oil prices, relatively high foreign reserves, relatively buoyant revenue streams for the federal, state, and local governments?
First, it's for the first half decade or so of the recovery, government was in denial, you know, that the recovery was taking place. They were still living in fear, you know, given that when we entered the stagnation, the biggest problem that the government seemed to remember was that they spent recklessly on capital projects, you know, in anticipation of high income they spent. And when the income didn't materialize in the face of the global downturn, we ended up in a debt trap. So when the recovery commenced and external reserves began to build up, government was very timid, you know. Much of the Obasanjo years, they did mostly recurrent spending. You know, capital spending was very minimal, apart from the stadium, you know, that they constructed then, you know, for, was it the Koja?
Yes.
Yeah, for the games. And that was the time you had external reserves peaked, at
$68
billion. We took out the external debt, but the regime did not do much in terms of using that savings to immediately better the lot of Nigerians. Subsequent regimes have not done any better. The second part of the problem, apart from government being timid, is inequality. The way government goes about managing the proceeds of this recovery is such as to increase inequality, in the distribution of income. You have access, for a few in government and business to, the proceeds of the recovery, and the masses are excluded. We need to speak in those terms, in terms of aspects of policy that touches on people's lives, people's living standards. You can't run away from wages. You can't leave labor. Many countries that do minimum wages or that protect, what you can pay people, minimum working hours, are doing so to fight poverty. Many many countries that do social security are trying to transfer wealth to those who are deprived.
The most vulnerable population.
Yes, Nigeria has to. There has been more attempts to better the payment of people in government than attempts have been made to better the payments to workers. So political appointees get paid heavily, but the civil service, is still relatively poorly remunerated.
Let me challenge you on this recovery that you've spoken about. Is it something that is sustainable? Is it something we worked for? Is it not just the price of oil that has gone up in the international markets?
Well, what impoverished the country was that the price of oil went down.
So
in the
perhaps
international
there's
market.
a substantive solution in terms of restructuring of the economy to prevent that dependence on the price of oil.
There's very little, there's very little you can do in the face of global cyclical swings. When the price of oil went below $20 a barrel in the 80s, and it dropped to $10 a barrel in 1998, the developed countries looked rich, they looked strong, because they got commodities
Cheap
for next to nothing. Now that the price of oil and other commodities have gone up, it's brought down their economies. Now they look weak. And developing countries like us are beginning to look rich.
But doesn't it then depend on what we do with those proceeds in terms of immunizing ourselves through economic diversification from those volatilities in commodities?
Yes, but the first level is that you can't discount the gains of the recovery just because it's arising from cyclical upswing. Because cyclical downswing is going to impoverish you. Cyclical upswing is going to enrich you. How you now manage resources across upswings and downswings is a policy issue.
Interesting discussion. I'll have you back someday, Ayo, to discuss this book, Nigeria's 36 States and the FTT. Perhaps we could look at a state-by-state breakdown of some of these issues.
Oh, yes.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much.
This is the policy with Okoyemi Agbaje. My takeaway from today's discussions has been, one, we must fix corruption. We must focus policy on helping the vulnerable, the poor and the unemployed, with clear policy targets for how much jobs we will create, how much poverty we would alleviate, with a focus on human development rather than just GDP growth. We must diversify this economy so that manufacturing, agriculture, solid minerals, transportation, and all other sectors can create jobs. We must stop exporting jobs, creating jobs in countries we import from. At the end of the day, we must improve education and skills so that our people can even take up those limited jobs that are created. Thank you for watching. See you next week.